This is something that took place back when I was a kid. I believe I was about 10 years old, and at the time I lived with my parents and older sister. We lived in a normal 2-story house in a pretty populated but generally safe neighborhood. So it was a Saturday morning and I was up early. I don't remember why I woke up early, if I had planned to or if I just happened to. It was like 7 a.m. though, and nobody else in the house was awake yet. This was before smartphones and streaming services and all that, so my favorite thing to do was watch TV. I remember that I went downstairs into the living room and turned on the TV. I was watching some kids shows in the living room and just relaxing and enjoying it. The sun had literally just risen as well. So probably 30 minutes into my watching TV, there was a knock on the front door. Being a kid, when I heard it, I got scared. I had no intentions of answering or even looking to see who it was. I stayed on the couch and did not have a view of the front door area from where I was. After maybe 30 seconds to a minute, there was another knock. I had hoped that the person would just go away. After the second knock though, I didn't hear anything for a couple minutes. My curiosity got the better of me, and I got up from the couch and walked over to the front door. I carefully approached and then looked out of the window next to the door to the front step. There was a man standing there. I would have expected whoever it was to be gone by now. I jumped back upon seeing him, and I didn't think that he saw me. I ran out of the room and back towards the living room. At that point, I remember hearing the man attempting to open the front door, which was locked. I had no idea who he was or what he wanted, but it really creeped me out now that he was trying to get inside. I was about to run upstairs and wake everybody up when I thought that maybe I heard the guy walking away. I slowly and quietly went back over to the front of the house, just close enough to look outside. This time, it seemed as though the man was gone because I didn't see him. I went closer and looked out of the window and still didn't see the guy. I realized that he probably walked away after realizing that nobody was going to answer the door and that he couldn't get inside. That made me feel a little better, and I went back into the living room. I really didn't want to wake everybody up, and I figured that they would be getting up soon on their own anyways. So I watched TV in the living room for a while longer. However, I was once again interrupted. This time, I heard another knock on the front door. It was much quieter than before though, but still obvious enough because of how quiet things were. This knock was steady and did not stop. It was a constant soft knocking, which went on for at least 30 seconds straight. I just sat there at first, not knowing what to do. Then I stood up and was trying to decide whether I would run upstairs or go and look to see who was there at the door. I figured that it was probably the same guy, but obviously I didn't know for sure. I ended up just standing up in the living room though and not really moving. Then the knocking finally stopped. I waited another 30 seconds or so and then walked to the front end of the house again. As soon as I got near the front door, I could see the same man was standing there. Then he moved to the side window right next to the door and looked through it right at me. He was clearly seeing me, and the guy was waving me over. When I saw that, I turned around and ran for the stairs. I went upstairs and woke up everyone. When we all went back downstairs though, the man was gone, and he did not return. Nobody knew who he was. After I described him to my parents as best as I could, they still had no idea who it could be. I'm really glad that he didn't get into the house and that I didn't answer the door. I'm not sure what he wanted, because he certainly didn't seem like a door-to-door salesman or anything, and the time with it being just after 7 a.m. is a bit early for that sort of stuff. I'm just glad that I never saw him again.
This happened to me about a week ago. I found a summer job at our local supermarket, and about 2 weeks in, I got asked to work the late night shift, which was 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. I accepted it since I was really in need of money, and I never really sleep early anyways. Everything was fine and dandy until about 3 a.m. when a shirtless, scarred-up guy came in the store. After lingering around in the store for a while, he quickly came up to the counter, making intense eye contact with me. As I was about to ask him if he needed any help, he then whispered, "Hey, don't you dare move." I didn't hear him at first, so I asked him if he could repeat that. At that point, he got agitated and then yelled, "Make another sound or I'll cut you up." In a swift motion, he vaulted over the counter, going to the alcohol section, trying to grab a bottle of whiskey. Thankfully, the owner had hid a baseball bat under the counter. The moment he turned his back to me, I took the bat and then swung full force at his knee. He winced in pain and tried to get up. I winded my bat yet again, acting like I was going to hit him again, just to see him pull out a homemade shiv of some sort. I let him get up, and at the moment he got up, he swung his shiv right at me, lightly lacerating my wrist. I pushed him back with my bat, and he ran for the door and got out. The day after, I had called the cops and showed them the security camera footage, but they haven't contacted me since. I think it's safe to say I won't be working the late night shift again for a long time. I often like to go out running in the summer or really whenever the weather's nice. This happened a week before I was supposed to start high school. I thought about going running that day, but got the idea in the morning that I would run in the evening instead while the sun is still up but isn't as hot as in the day, and there isn't a chance for it to get hotter if I don't manage to get back in time like in the morning. Well, of course, I forget my promise to myself and only remember it at around 9 p.m. Now, it's the end of the summer, so the sun is already setting sooner than I'm used to, but I just tell myself, I'll just get back inside like an hour or so. It'll be fine. I've already been putting off running, so I don't want to put it off again. I should probably mention that I'm a girl, and even though a lot of girls I know change the side of the road they walk on whenever they see a distinctly drunk-looking guy walking, I was always the one calling them pussies and was ready to take on the first rogue who tried to get to me. I also live in a less populated area out of the town where almost everyone knows everyone, so I was feeling extra sure of my safety. What a naive fool I was, I know. So I go out, start my run, and it's fine. It's getting a bit dark, but I can still see the running track, so it's all good. I started to feel a bit off when I see a pair walking in front of me. When I get closer, they turn out to be just teenage guys, and I run past them with no problem. When I finally reach the usual spot in my run where I turn around, a cemetery. Ultra creepy, I know, but it has benches and it's a small graveyard, so I never feel weird taking a break there, and it's already gotten pretty dark. I drink some water from my bottle and just stand under a tree next to the gate and territory of the cemetery. But I don't sit down where I usually do because the bench is next to a fence, and the darkness has finally made me a little weary about being alone and someone jumping on me. It's pretty funny that that's what scared me the most at the time. When I catch my breath, I stay for a few more minutes just listening to the wind. I see a bike drive past the cemetery taking the route that I'll take while running back. I leave my resting place and it's gotten really dark. Dark enough that I could barely see 2 meters in front of me. I start slowly running back. After 15 meters or so, I start hearing voices. A couple of more and I can clearly hear someone talking. My thoughts immediately jump to a conclusion that there are at least 2 people in front of me if I'm hearing a conversation. Now I slow down even more until I get close enough to actually hear what's being said. Keep in mind it's completely dark and this road doesn't even have street lights, so I can't see anything. I get close enough to finally make out the words, and my heart sinks at what I hear. I can't recall the exact words that were being said, but the general idea. The male voice then said, "I see this girl. I could just pull her into the bushes." There were tall bushes lining one side of the running track. As I said, at first my heart stopped, but immediately after I go into fight or flight mode. I can hear my own heart beating in my ears, and I'm full of adrenaline, the bad kind. I know that I can't just stop or he'll know that I heard what he said, so I continue to walk, but thank God that the running track is separated from the road by a small grass field, so I go to the side of the road, making some distance between us. I kept looking at him. Keep in mind I still don't even know how many people there are, but I see a square of light, presumably a phone, and then I hear him jump on his bicycle and drive off. It turned out he was talking on the phone, but just because he was alone didn't mean I was any less scared of him. I walked on the side of the road for a good few minutes until I'm sure he would be far away from me, and once I get back on the running track, I can sprint home like crazy. All the way back, I was shaking with fear and looking at the bushes and cars that passed me with delirium, squishing my water bottle in my hand, ready to smack anyone who came close to me. When I finally reached the first road lights, I really felt like I escaped death. I really got lucky that night.
Not too long ago, I was watching YouTube videos with my girlfriend. We were at my apartment just hanging out at night. I have an apartment that's not the greatest. It's on the first floor and I have a little patio that goes outside from the living room through a sliding glass door. Overall, it's fine though. So like I said, my girlfriend was over and we were just sitting on the couch watching TV. We watch YouTube or whatever all the time. It was probably like 9 p.m. or so. Suddenly, the screen went black for a moment and then we were seeing some random phone screen. We were both very confused at first, but soon realized that someone must have connected their phone to my TV by mistake. There's a lot of apartment units close by, so you can connect to other people's devices if you really want to. We were seeing the phone screen of whoever this was going through their apps. I figured they would disconnect after realizing they were connected to my TV and not their own, and I expected the screen to return to what we were doing. In the meantime though, I was kind of interested to see what this person was doing, so I didn't bother to get up and turn off the TV or anything. The person then went into the Photos app on their phone. Then they started scrolling through them one at a time. It didn't take me long to see myself among these photos. There were pictures taken straight from my social media pages, such as Facebook and Instagram, just screenshots of them. And then there were pictures of my girlfriend as well. All kinds of pictures of both of us, from both my Facebook and her Facebook as well. And the more this went on, the more confused and creeped out we were. There were probably 10 photos of each of us, and this went on for several minutes. My girlfriend and I were talking to each other in disbelief, wondering who this was and what they were doing. Then, just like that, their phone disconnected. My TV returned to its home screen, and I was left wondering what on earth had just happened. But less than 5 minutes later, as my girlfriend and I were talking to each other trying to figure out what was going on, there was suddenly a knock at my apartment door. I rarely get anybody knocking on the door, so as soon as it happened, we both stopped talking instantly. After a moment, I got up and walked over to see who was there. When I got there, I didn't see anybody. I was even more paranoid now. I figured whoever had connected to the TV had just knocked on my door. We were very confused, and eventually sat back down on the couch and tried to forget about it. We went on the YouTube app again and tried to play a video to take our mind off of things. Meanwhile, my sliding glass door in the room was mostly covered by blinds, but there was about 2 feet at the end that wasn't, as they weren't closed all the way. A few minutes into watching YouTube again, and I saw something out of the corner of my eye. You couldn't really see anything outside with some light being on in the apartment and it being dark out, but I did notice that someone was really close to the window in the opening of the blinds. I looked closer, and the person came closer. Then I realized that there was a man wearing a black ski mask with his face right on the other side of the glass, looking in. My girlfriend noticed him just after me and screamed. She got up and ran out of the room, as I stood up and backed away in shock. Then, very quickly, the masked man turned and ran off into the night. I went over and closed the blinds entirely. Then I made sure that every door and window was covered and locked and all that. I was very paranoid for the rest of the night, but nothing else happened. And since then, there have been no other occurrences like that. It could have just been an elaborate prank, but that was a little bit far to be taking things in my mind. And I also have no idea who would do that kind of a prank to us. My girlfriend and I still get a little bit worried that something like that might happen again when we're at my place at night. And we also have no clue who it was that could have done it. I'm just hoping that they don't return. I used to work night shifts at this large manufacturing facility. The night shift consisted of a very small crew, including 5 security workers and 5 of us doing administration and packing. As administration staff, I sat with security as they'd switch between patrolling and monitoring the cameras. It was usually silent and boring. One night near Halloween, I was halfway into my shift on my lunch hour break. It was chilly, and I went to my car to grab my bigger jacket and have a smoke break. I was right outside the back door where this fence is closest to the building. It's maybe 10 yards off the back door. The only light was motion activated, and I had to keep making grand arm movements to keep it on. It's all grass and shadows up to the fence, and the light doesn't really hit that far. I was watching videos on my phone, and the light went out from a lack of motion. I sat in the dark a bit, sipping my coffee and finishing my cigarette. As I was finishing, I reached up and waved to activate the light to find the ashtray, but as the light flickered on, I heard a noise on the fence across from me. We do get some animals out there, and they could get startled, but as I stood up, I heard the fence keep slightly jiggling. When I looked up, I didn't see much. The light didn't really illuminate much outside its circle on the ground. My first thought was to say hello, which I did in a questioning tone. When I spoke, the sound stopped for a moment. I squinted into the darkness trying to adjust, but it was hard with the light on. However, once the light turned off again, the light from the moon had a little bit more effect lighting up the area. The fence started jiggling again. As my eyes adjusted better, I saw movement. It looked like a person opposite me at the fence fidgeting with the links. I thought this must be a kid just trying to spook us. Maybe they were going to break in and explore, which some kids had done before without knowing the building never closed. But it wasn't common, and this was one person, alone. I was worried, so I radioed to desk security with my walkie-talkie. I informed security that we had a visitor outside the fence on the north end of the building. I've seen the monitors of camera feed, and I know this area is totally covered by cameras. They would be able to check the fence clearly. My walkie beeped back, and the security guy said, "We aren't reading any movement at the fence. Is it in the tree line?" I responded back no, and they were fiddling with the fence right in front of me. The next events all happened so fast. Security didn't even have the chance to reply to me when from the fence, I heard this massively louder thrash of the lynx, and all I saw was a figure full-on sprinting at me. I spilled my coffee all over as I rushed back inside the building. I pushed myself inside and held the knob in place, trying to keep the deadbolt in place. The knob was flicking down hard against my hold. I could hear and feel something moving against the opposite side of the door. By the time security got down to me, I had the deadbolt in place, and the knob of the door was still now. I didn't understand why the security workers weren't taking me seriously while I explained the story, until I saw the playback from the cameras. It was just me outside. There was nothing there. I immediately thought this was a big prank on me, but everyone else genuinely thought that I was the one fooling them. Upon watching the footage a second time more closely, however, we noticed the way the door handle kept moving even when I removed my hand from it. Both the inside camera and outside caught it. We also noticed right before I panicked and turned to run inside, the fence made a slight jolt as if it was pushed. There were no holes in the fence or any kind of cuts made where somebody could squeeze through. There were no creepy shadows or unexplained wisps of smoke or light or movement besides those. Nobody there wanted to admit anything happened to me. Everyone came up with logical explanations like it was tricks of the moonlight, an overactive imagination, or too much coffee. I didn't want to argue about it. They already thought that I was being weird about it. I went about finishing my shift, but nobody used the back door again that night, and it remained locked. The longest employed security employee was finishing up his shift at the desk with me in the office that night. A few minutes before clocking out, he cleared his throat and told me, "I never really liked that north end. It feels like someone's eyes are always on me." It's honestly the most he's ever said to me in the years plus I worked there, the most I ever heard him say. I felt like the statement held even more weight from that alone. I worked there another 7 months and never had another incident. I never actually went out there again though. I stopped smoking, took my breaks out in the lobby, or wasted time chatting with coworkers. I made any excuse not to go out by that door again. I've never before or since had any moments where I felt like my imagination got the better of me, and I truly believe that wasn't the case here. I keep thinking back to that door handle jerking down when I was not touching it anymore. That had to be proof I wasn't imagining the whole thing.
So this first started when I first moved into my new place last summer in 2019. I live with my landlord, her elderly mom, and my friend Daisy. I also started a new job working the night shift at a hotel, so I was up most nights. I'm going to preface the story with some background information that would help make the story make sense. Since my landlord knew her neighbors very well as she lived in this house all her life and there's hardly any street parking, I was able to park my car in the vacant house's driveway. directly parallel across the street from our house. When I park my car, I can see the front of my place with my rearview mirrors. Our house is right in front of a very busy stop sign, so seeing and hearing traffic is something that we all had to get used to. Daisy and I are women and are best friends that met in college. We've known each other for a few years at this point and did everything together. I remember that it was a warm summer Thursday night. Daisy and I loved to leave the house past midnight, eat horrible fast food, roll the windows down, and drive along the coast. It was around 1:45 a.m. as I finally pulled up to my parking spot. We sat in my car for a while listening to music and finishing the last bit of our late night munchies. My windows were up by this point, but we could hear a bigger car approaching the stop sign. It sounded like a diesel. Of course, it was a stereotypical white van that prompted me to joke, "Daisy, look at that creepy white van." From my rearview mirror, the next thing we knew, we saw what looked like a thin man pick up his camera from the passenger side and take at least 5 pictures of the front of our house with the flash on. Daisy and I silently looked at each other in horror as the van then sped off. The next day, Daisy and I told our landlord all about the incident, and she told us this wasn't the first time that one of her tenants reported this. Though she brushed it off despite us telling her that anyone taking pictures of her house that late at night did not have good intentions, it really put Daisy and me on edge. Some time had passed as the coronavirus pandemic crept its way into the US towards the end of 2019. I was going to file a police report, as I eventually caught most of the person's license plate after what felt like months of investigating. At the beginning of February 2020, the van stopped coming. This caused me to think that the pandemic may have either gotten the person sick or affected them in some way. Although the person didn't take any more pictures, when the van drove by, it came from the same direction every time at around 1 to 1:30 a.m. It would stop for an eerily long amount of time, then it would speed off out of nowhere, as if the person was racing another car that was never there. I did stop investigating after 2 weeks of nothing. I still get very anxious if I ever hear a loud diesel-like vehicle driving by late at night. I don't know what that person wanted, why they were taking pictures of my landlord's house. Maybe once the shelter-in-place is lifted in my county, I might investigate again just to ensure that the creep is really gone.
Back when I was 11, I had a sleepover at my best friend Alyssa's house. She lived just down the street from me, and we went to school together and hung out all the time. So on this night in particular, I walked over to her house sometime in the afternoon like usual. The first part of the sleepover went normally. I don't recall if it was a weekend or just a summer night, but I know that we stayed up pretty late. Alyssa's bedroom was upstairs at the front part of the house. At probably like midnight, we were in Alyssa's room and we noticed something out the window. We could see the street in front of her house and had a pretty good view of it. There was this guy walking down the street, but then he turned around and walked back. He seemed to be almost pacing back and forth between the house past Alyssa's to the right and the one next door to the left. We watched him walking and were wondering what he was doing. None of us knew who he was or recognized him as a neighbor. This was something that was unusual for the street as well. Typically, there were not people walking down the street really late at night. After watching him pacing in the street for several minutes, I remember that he stopped and was kind of looking around. Then he looked up and we were sure that he saw us. He seemed to almost make eye contact with us for a second, and Alyssa and I quickly ducked down. Obviously, we didn't want him to see us, whoever he was. We decided not to look out the window anymore after that. However, probably 2 or 3 minutes later, there was a knock at the front door of the house. We both feared that it was the man right away. Alyssa's parents had gone to bed already, so we were the only ones awake in the house. We ignored the first knock, but there was soon another one. You could not see who was at the front door from Alyssa's window because the front step had a small roof over it. So we decided to go downstairs and see who was there. After making it downstairs, it was very dark in the house, but we didn't turn on any lights. Soon we made it to the front area of the house and to a window. We both looked out and saw the same man from the street standing there. He looked very suspicious because he had a hood covering most of his head and I could barely see his face. And the weather was not bad or anything that would make that seem normal. As we were both looking at him, he suddenly started looking around and then locked eyes with us. It was just like before when he had somehow seen us. We both ducked away from the window at that moment. However, the man then charged for the window that we were at. He reached it and started pounding on the glass. Alyssa and I both ran upstairs and woke up her parents. By the time they got downstairs though, the man was gone. The police were called and they arrived a while later with the man still nowhere in sight. We were afraid that he would return, but he didn't. After that night, we thankfully never saw that man again. We talk about that night all the time still, wondering who he was and what he was doing. This happened about 4 years ago now, but it's something that I will never forget. So I lived with a roommate at the time, and we both rented this one house. It was a somewhat small house in a pretty typical residential neighborhood. I don't live there anymore and have since moved out. But one night, I found myself home alone as my roommate went out of town. I was sitting in the living room and watching NCIS on TV. Out of nowhere, I heard my phone vibrating, indicating that I had received a text. I picked it up and looked at it to see that I had a text from an unknown number. The text said, "I also like NCIS." I was very confused at first, not knowing who sent that to me or what they were talking about. Then I realized that possibly someone was spying on me. My TV was in the living room and it faced the front window, so if you looked inside from the outside, you could see what was on TV. I quickly looked behind me to the street out front. At first, I didn't really see anything suspicious, but I soon realized that there was a car parked across on the other side of the street. It was not uncommon for cars to be parked on the street, but I didn't recognize this one at all. I moved closer to the window and looked, but I really couldn't tell if anybody was inside of it or not. So I closed the curtains completely, which covered the windows and would not allow anybody to see in. Meanwhile, I texted the number back, asking who it was. Several minutes later, I got a reply. The new text said, "I'm not allowed to watch anymore?" I once again asked who it was, but they did not reply to me. A while later, I looked out of the window again, and the car was still there. Then I got another text. It said, "I saw you looking at me. What do you want?" I didn't know what to say, and I didn't reply, but I was very worried now. They texted again within another minute and said, "Why don't you come outside?" This one was enough for me to block the number, and I did. A while later, I looked out of the window again. This time, the car was gone. I looked out several more times that night, but did not see the car again. The rest of the time that I lived in that house, nothing strange like that happened again. I also didn't see the car either. I still wonder about it though. Who was that was texting me, and how did they get my number? Also, what would have happened if I had gone outside? I don't work nights anymore, but for years I worked the night shift in a residential care facility. On weekends, I was the only person in charge of a dementia facility. It was sometimes spooky, consisting of 15 residents and only me to keep an eye on them all throughout the night. Around 3 a.m. in the morning, after doing an intentional round where I checked on all the residents and they were safe and well, I heard the doorbell ring. I got a sudden wave of goosebumps because this was a secure facility and it was the middle of the night. I went and looked out of the window, but there was nobody there. I blew it off as being a hallucination because I was exhausted most of the nights. About 10 minutes later, the doorbell rang again, so I went back to the window and checked again. Nobody was there, but I looked across the street and a strange car was parked there. I took a photo of it just in case, and then I went back to my station where I had been playing a game of cards with a delightful but very demented lady. I sat down and she looked at me and said, "What did the gentleman want, dearie?" Chills went down my spine, but I brushed it off because hallucinations are common with dementia, and this lady is particularly prone to not being oriented to time and place. However, the doorbell rang again less than 5 minutes later, and this time I was getting scared. Another one of my residents was awake and walking in the hallway, painting with a clean paintbrush to keep him occupied. I passed him on the way to the front window, and he turned to me and said, "Don't answer the door alone, he might hurt you," before continuing to pretend to paint. I looked out of the window to see the same car as before, and as I was looking around, I saw a shadow moving in front of the door. A person walked around the corner and then looked straight into the window next to me. We made direct eye contact, and it was essentially a jump scare for me, so I was startled and screamed. My residents started freaking out, and the guy on the other side of the door ran away. I called the police, and they showed up shortly after. It was straight chaos at that point, because I had 15 residents who all had been woken by the commotion, and 2 police officers in the building now also. Eventually, with the help of the 2 kind officers, I was able to get everybody settled down, but it took a while. I eventually learned from the cops that there was a woman down the road whose house was broken into. She was attacked in bed by someone who ransacked her house looking for drugs. I can't help but wonder if it was the same person from earlier that night intentionally trying to get into my facility for the drugs that are kept there. I'm grateful that our whole facility was so secure, and apparently the culprit just took the next best option. A strange part of the story that I'll never understand is how 2 of my patients knew that there was a man out there who wanted to enter and potentially hurt me. They were never close enough to the door to look out of the window and see anyone. It feels like one of those eerie guardian angel moments, or just a strange coincidence. I left that job not long after because they refused to hire a second person to work the nights, despite being understaffed according to best practice guidelines.
We were 16, an age where you feel invincible. It was summer, and school was out, and my friend and I who lived in the same apartment complex decided to go to the mall and kill time, as any other teenager would do. I don't remember much about that day other than our walk home from the mall. It must have been around 9 when we left, since that's the time the mall closes. Our apartment building was 2 miles away from the mall, so of course we walked. It was really hot out, and we both knew that once we got home there would be nothing to do, so we opted to walk home. We both enjoyed the conversation and the passing of time. Our town wasn't exactly dangerous. Yeah, there were some muggings and theft, but it wasn't as bad as some of the other cities in our county, so we walked those 2 miles oblivious to any potential threats. We were a mile in when we had passed an intersection. Shortly thereafter, 3 males walked out of the opposite street and began walking behind us. I didn't think much of it. It's summer. They were young. It's hot. No reason to be suspicious. My friend, however, was unnerved. Hey, yeah? Those guys are behind us. Yeah, what about them? Well, I'm pretty sure they're following us, my friend said. What? No, I don't think so. You're just being paranoid. As soon as I said that, one of the men started whistling at us. I turned around. Hey, what you got in the bag? We had shopping bags from the mall. Nothing. Leave us the hell alone, my friend retorted. I remember just being pissed. Why would she respond to them? At this point, I'm nervous as hell. Turns out my friend was right. Call it intuition. We begin walking even faster now that we sense danger, and as we quicken our pace, so do the men. They know we're on to them. We near a plaza with a Del Taco, and as we enter the parking lot, the men disperse. One is directly behind us, and the other 2 were on our sides. I turn around. They all then whip out freaking baseball bats out of nowhere. At this point, I turn to my friend and we hightail it to Del Taco, not bothering to turn around. Thank God it wasn't too late or they'd be closed and we'd have nowhere to hide. As soon as we enter the Del Taco, we look out the windows and witness all of the men jump into a Cadillac Escalade that was parked. Were they only scaring us? Why the bats? Why the car? What the hell's going on? We just watch as the car drove away. That doesn't quell our fear though. We spend about 10 minutes in the restaurant deciding what to do next. Do I call my dad to pick us up, or do we actually walk the half a mile home? We didn't want to worry our parents, and so we ended up deciding to walk. The whole time we're constantly turning back, anticipating a black Escalade to pop out of nowhere and kidnap us, but luckily it never did. As soon as we got home, we promised ourselves not to tell our parents, as we knew it would hinder us from hanging out again. The moment I walked through the door, I blabbed to my parents. I found out later that my friend did the same. Scariest experience of my young life. When I was in middle school, I was a petite and an attractive lady with curves with daddy issues. So I signed up for some hookup dating apps to meet with random local guys. Dangerous and illegal, I know. But I was a stupid middle schooler who was having untreated mental issues. There was this one guy I matched up with that I'll call Tyler. I was meeting up with Tyler in the dead of night so he could drive me to his place so we could hook up. The reason why I was so late at night around 3 in the morning was because I had to sneak out. And over time, I had memorized my parents' sleeping patterns since they didn't have an exact schedule. Anyways, I was sneaking out through the front door, and I had to wait for Tyler to drive to the location I sent him to the park and then wait for me. To walk there, you just have to cross the townhomes I live in at the time to a local elderly's home that where I live is known as a place to meet up as friends or couples. As I was walking across, there was an area which I had to go through to get to the elderly's home, and it was dark as hell. There's a sidewalk gap between apartments so people could walk their dogs and stuff, which looks totally normal in the morning, but terrifying at night. I was walking up to the stairs that lead into this section of the sidewalk, and I had a dreading feeling that someone was watching me. I froze in my tracks with my heart racing, before I decided to continue walking forward since Tyler was picking me up soon, and a silhouette of a tall, big dark figure emerged from the shadows and then approached me. Some of the light of the surrounding porch lights had lit up his features. It was a man who was about 5'11" to 6 foot tall, and he was a big Hispanic guy with some facial hair who looked to be above the age of 20, who just kind of looked like he wasn't all there. He walked a bit closer, and I was too stunned to walk away, as he then began to speak with slurred speech. "Hey, are you looking for Chloe's house?" I then responded with a confused no. "Are you Chloe?" I said no, and then I asked who she was. He proceeded to tell me that she was having a house party, and he's waiting for everyone to leave so they can have some alone time, or something like that. It was really hard to tell since he was obviously on something at the moment. He then asked for my name, and of course, as the dumbass I was, I told him my actual name. He said that it was pretty, and then he told me to hold up before he turned on his phone flashlight, then saying, "Damn, you're fine as hell." I quickly shot him down and told him that I was only 14, and he didn't seem to believe me. At some point in the conversation, he kept suggesting that we should hang out, but at this point I was just trying to escape, but every time I tried, he kept blocking the way out. He had asked me some questions and almost asked for my number, but I decided to sort of cut him off before telling him that I really had to go because someone was waiting for me. I didn't know if Tyler was there yet or not, but it made a good excuse before I bolted the hell out of there and kindly worded it before I left and then started to sprint to the other side of the street. He wasn't there yet though, so I waited a bit longer on the sidewalk. Another stranger who I assumed was from the same party was walking by and asked if I was alright. We made some small talk, which made me feel better. Just then, I finally saw Tyler's car. He arrived. Nothing else creepy happened that night, thank God. And he didn't live in my town. He was just there for the house party, or at least I hope. I know that he asked me some other weird and creepy things, but I'm having a hard time remembering since it's late at night. But this experience really scared the hell out of me since I was obviously a minor, and also just approaching a woman at night and blocking their access out. Who does that? I wonder what could have happened if I didn't tell him that someone was waiting for me, or if he wasn't waiting for some chick who he drove an entire town over to bang at 4 in the morning. Please be careful and don't do what I did at all.
This happened when I was around 12 or 13, and it's still one of the creepiest things I've ever experienced. We all refuse to talk about it even to this day. It all started when my friend Jake invited me and a couple of other friends, Marc and Chris, over for a sleepover at his house. Jake lived in this older house on the edge of town. Nothing too weird or creepy, a nice modern home with 4 floors. Jake's mom worked nights, so it was usually just him, his little sister, and their dog Max in the house. We were wild every time we had a sleepover because there were no parents around. That meant we could mess around as much as we wanted, stay up late, raid the fridge, and play dumb games. We were in Jake's room, which wasn't huge, but had enough space for the four of us to lay out our sleeping bags on the floor. We'd been joking around and watching YouTube videos for a while when Marc suddenly sat up and asked where his blanket was. At first, we laughed because Marc always lost stuff, like he'd misplaced his phone while holding it, but we realized his blanket was not anywhere in the room. It wasn't under his sleeping bag, it wasn't shoved in a corner, and it wasn't even in the closet. Everywhere we checked, it was not there. He was annoyed, but grabbed another blanket from Jake's closet, and we went back to watching YouTube videos. We went into the kitchen to make some pizza rolls, and came back about 20 minutes later, and when we did, Chris's blanket was gone. We all just stared at him. No one was laughing now. Jake turned the light on, and we started looking around the room again. Once again, Chris's blanket was completely gone, just like Marc's. We all started to freak out a bit, because everybody had gone upstairs to make the food, which wouldn't make any sense how the blanket was gone. We then noticed a torn corner of Marc's original blanket sticking out from under Jake's bed. So I went down to grab the blanket, and I heard a loud rustling noise. "What was that?" someone had screamed. When I was leaned down to look under the bed, I realized there was something under there. We played it off thinking that it was the dog, because we had not seen him all night. As we were going back upstairs, that's when we noticed the muddy footprints near the window. The window was cracked open just slightly, enough to let breeze in, but there were faint, muddy footprints on the floor, leading from the window towards Jake's bed. We all could have sworn that the window was closed earlier. We decided to get out of Jake's room and sleep in the living room instead. We brought our sleeping bags with us and made sure to lock the door behind us. Max was sprawled out on the couch, and all of a sudden randomly started barking down the hallway into the pitch black. We didn't sleep much that night. We just sat there in a huddle, holding random weapons we had found around the house. Jake's mom came home the next morning, and we told her everything. She believed everything right away, which was nice, but then she noticed the muddy footprints. When she did, she called the police. The cops couldn't find anything at first though. They said it was probably an animal or maybe a prank, which didn't really make us feel any better. But about a week later, Jake called me and explained that they had found someone in the attic. Apparently, when the police came back for a more thorough search, they found evidence that someone had been living in Jake's house for months. The guy was hiding in the attic and sneaking down at night to steal food, clothes, and apparently blankets for over 4 months. I learned that the guy was what they call a frogger, which basically means somebody who secretly lives in other people's houses. The idea that he was under the bed while we were all sitting there is kind of insane to think about.
I'm a 22-year-old female, and I grew up in this small, reserved community in Lake George, New York. I live with 3 siblings and my parents. Me being from New York State, I never really visited the city much. I went maybe twice as a kid, but I never really remembered much of my visits. When I graduated high school, me and my best friend, whom I'm now living with, thought it would be fun to take a small road trip down to New York City. It was just the 2 of us. We stayed for a weekend and had this really amazing time. It seemed more magical going to the city this time around than it did many years ago. I absolutely fell in love with the city life and wanted more than anything just to live there. I work real estate. It's not something I want to do or even thought I would do for a career, but me being 18 and money hungry, I thought I should just go for it and take that 77-hour class. I ended up getting my real estate license at 19, and I made pretty good money off doing it. After saving up, I decided to move to New York City, and it was the best decision that I could possibly have ever made. I was pursuing my real estate career down there and was renting out and selling properties like crazy. I lived alone, while my family and best friend were still upstate. It didn't really take long though before I adapted to living alone. I've always been super independent anyway. One day, I get home around 6 p.m. and was thinking about making myself some dinner because I went grocery shopping the night before. When I get all my groceries out to cook, I noticed there was a few things missing. I didn't think much of it as I blame myself for probably forgetting something or using it already without even realizing it. I shrug it off and make dinner with the things that I had, as in I didn't really feel like going back to the store on that night. While I was winding down for bed later, I heard noises coming from inside my walls. I'm not sure what prompted me to think this, but I just thought that maybe it was mice or maybe rats. I'm not a very skeptical person, so I kind of forgot about it and said I'd take care of it the next day. Over the next few days, though, things began getting weirder. Plastic water bottles from the case would randomly disappear. I noticed that my hygiene products were getting low very quickly. Food was still going missing. I started to get worried after this. I wanted to set up some cameras in my apartment to maybe catch what the problem was, but part of me didn't really want to know the answer to that. I couldn't sleep the next couple of nights. I kept hearing those god-awful scratching noises coming from inside my walls, and banging started occurring on the floor. I even swore up and down that I woke up to doors opening and closing one night. The sounds occurred at nighttime, not so much in the morning. Me being gone working during the day, I had no idea what could have gone on. But however, on this particular morning, it was early, maybe 5 a.m. It was still dark outside, and I heard noises again. I grabbed my phone and put 911 in the keypad, just in case, but didn't dial it yet. I started looking in all the rooms of my apartment. While looking, I heard this huge bang, and then didn't hesitate to call the police. Not long after that, they arrived. I told them what had been happening, and they began searching for themselves. One of the officers called to the other side of the guest room. There was what looked like to be a crawl space in the back of the closet. One of the officers moved the board that was covering the entrance to the space and shone his flashlight inside. To my absolute shock and horror, the officer pulled out this scrawny, middle-aged white man out of that room. He looked absolutely cracked out. I had no idea how he could have even gotten there. The officer who found him put him in cuffs, while the other officer searched the room. He found drug paraphernalia, food wrappers, and weapons, such as a semi-automatic pistol and several other pocket knives, as well as some knives from my kitchen, not to mention a ton of my personal belongings. The officers said from their observation, it looked like the man had been living in that space for almost a week. If I didn't call the police that morning, I might have wound up dead. From that day on, I moved and promised myself I would never live alone again. Well, at least with an unwanted guest.
This happened just last summer. I live by myself in what I would describe as a typical apartment. I have one bedroom, a bathroom, kitchen, and living room pretty much. It's inside of a building in a fairly large apartment complex. So one night, I worked sort of late into the night at my job. I was really tired from the long day and pretty much just arrived home, took a quick shower, and went to bed. That was around midnight. However, I woke up at roughly 4 o'clock in the morning. Obviously, I wanted to get more sleep, but I was wide awake. I was also very thirsty and felt dehydrated. Sometimes, mostly in the summer, I wake up in the night because of dehydration, and obviously on this night I had worked late and not been able to drink as much. Then usually I drink some water and feel better immediately and then go right back to sleep. But some of the times when I wake up, I'm wide awake and can't go back to sleep right away, and this was one of those times. So what I usually do when that happens is get up and go into the living room and watch TV until I get sleepy again. That might be 15 or 30 minutes usually. So that was what I did on this night. I got out of bed, drank some water, immediately felt better, and then sat on the couch and turned on the TV. My couch is to the right of the front door to the apartment, about 20 feet away. I remember that when I sat down, I glanced over and happened to notice that my door was actually unlocked. I realized that I somehow had forgotten to lock it. Normally, I always remember, but I guess I forget sometimes. I went over and locked the door and then went back to the couch. I started watching TV and waited for myself to feel sleepy again. I was flipping around the channels for maybe 5 minutes when suddenly I heard a noise. Obviously, it was very quiet other than the noise from the TV, but the sound I heard was somebody trying to open the front door to my apartment. I really couldn't believe it, and I had no idea who it could be. I sat and listened, but didn't hear anything else. Then, after a moment, I got up and I walked over to the door. I looked out of the peephole, but nobody was there. Then I opened up my apartment door and looked into the hallway. That's when I saw him. There was a man wearing a hooded sweatshirt walking away from me down the hallway. He was mostly looking down at the ground, and then he went to another door and tried opening it, but this one was also locked. I watched him go to another door and try that one as well. Apparently, he hadn't noticed me opening the door. I didn't know who this guy was, but he was seemingly trying to get into any apartment. As he reached the end of the hallway, he suddenly looked behind him and then he saw me. When he did, I quickly closed the door. I was afraid that he would come back, but he didn't. Soon after, I went back to bed. I'm really glad that I woke up when I did that night and locked my door, or who knows what could have happened. Alright, so this happened last summer, and I still can't believe how it went down. My friends and I had been planning this sleepover for weeks. It was at Josh's house, which was pretty much the best spot for stuff like this. His house was big, his parents were chill, and there was always plenty of food and space to play physical games. Josh was one of those kids who always had crazy ideas, but we trusted him. He was funny, confident, and usually the one who came up with plans for the group. He made things fun, and we all looked up to him in some way. There were 5 of us that night. Me, Josh, Ryan, Mike, and Ethan. We showed up at around 6 p.m. and just chilled. We did what most teens do, which was order a pizza, play video games, and watch horror movies until things got late. Around 10, Josh's cousin Alex showed up. I didn't think much of it because Alex would always swing by sometimes. He was a few years older, kind of sketchy, but Josh always said he was a good person. Alex hung out for maybe an hour, ate all of our food, and then just left. It was kind of annoying. Josh said something about how Alex was crashing at his place while his parents were out of town, but he wasn't staying the night with us. This made sense, so I didn't care to ask more questions. The rest of the night was pretty boring. We played some card games and eventually decided to sleep in the living room. Josh said his room upstairs was too small for all of us, plus the couch and floor space downstairs were more comfortable. We all set up our sleeping bags, left a few lights on, and fell asleep around midnight. I don't think any of us were completely knocked out though. We were all joking and half awake for a while, shouting explicit things and dirty jokes to make someone across the room laugh. At some point, I woke up to the sound of the sliding glass door in the kitchen opening. It wasn't loud, but it was just enough to snap me out of my half-sleep. I figured maybe Josh had gone to get a snack or something, but then I heard muffled voices. I couldn't make out what they were saying, so I looked over at Josh, and he was still sleeping in his sleeping bag. Before I could say anything, the living room lights flipped on. Standing there was someone wearing a ski mask and holding a gun. My fight and flight was triggered, and I froze. Behind him was another guy, also masked and carrying a duffel bag. They started shouting, telling us to sit up and stay quiet. We were told to empty our pockets, grab our wallets, and toss everything into the middle of the room. I've never been held at gunpoint, so I felt really nervous, scrambling to do what he said. I couldn't stop staring at the gun in his hand. It wasn't some fake toy, it was real, and he was pointing it right at us. I couldn't understand that it was happening. Josh was trying to act just as scared as the rest of us, but something about the way he kept glancing at the armed robber felt off for some reason. It was like they were making eye contact, almost like they were communicating without saying anything. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but the more I watched, the more obvious it became. The robber kept screaming orders, telling us to grab our phones, watches, and anything valuable. He even made Mike dump out his backpack because he said it looked too full. The other guy with the robber started going through the kitchen drawers, grabbing random stuff like Josh's mom's jewelry box. It was chaos. He even started drinking the milk straight out of the carton. This made me panic more because I wanted to laugh, which is messed up. And then he fired the gun. It wasn't at any of us, thank God, but he shot it into the ceiling. The sound was deafening. Ryan started crying, and Ethan couldn't stop shaking. The robber told us to shut up or the next shot wouldn't miss. I couldn't even think straight. The only thing I could do was hope that it would be over soon. After they grabbed everything, the robber and the other guy ran out the door, leaving us sitting there in shock. No one said anything for a while. Josh was the first one to speak, saying something like, "What just happened?" But the way he said it felt so fake, like he was trying too hard to act surprised. That's when Ethan noticed something. Josh's stuff wasn't touched. His phone was still sitting on the coffee table, his wallet was still in his bag, and even his expensive sneakers by the door were still there. It didn't make any sense at the time. Ethan started putting it together out loud, saying how weird it was that Alex the cousin had shown up earlier that night and someone had come back to rob us. He kept saying that it didn't feel random. We all started to connect the dots, and an argument broke out. So we wanted to go find his cousin, but then we were confronted by Josh. He flipped out and started yelling that we were crazy and that it wasn't Alex. None of us were buying it though. Josh was sweating like crazy. He kept saying we needed to call the cops, but Ethan pointed out that Josh didn't even try to stop the robbers, even though he supposedly knew him. It was obvious that Josh had set us up. We ended up calling our parents instead of the cops. None of us trusted Josh to be honest if we involved the police. When our parents got there, Josh was still trying to play the victim, saying we were being paranoid. None of us believed him anymore. Later, we found out that Alex did have a record for stuff like petty theft and breaking into lockers. It wasn't a surprise. Josh had sold us out, and for what? A few $100 worth of phones and wallets? I haven't talked to Josh since that night. None of us have. One time, I was home by myself and watching TV. I was very relaxed, sitting on the couch in the living room and just enjoying a movie. The volume was kind of loud on the TV, and I was having some popcorn. To that point, I had been home for several hours, and it was a good night. As the movie went on, I remember that there was a really quiet part. Just during that, I thought I heard the sound of something coming from the other room. It got my attention, and I was slightly concerned for a moment, until I realized it was probably just my cat. He was always moving around the house, so I didn't pay it much thought. Several minutes later, though, at another quiet spot in the movie, I heard the sound from the other room again. It just didn't really sound like my cat, but what else could it be? I looked around, and then I saw that my cat was sleeping on the living room floor in the same room as me. That made me realize that the sound I heard in the other room was not the cat. I got a bad feeling, wondering what it could be. I paused the movie and listened closely. When I did, though, I stopped hearing anything for about a minute or two. Then I heard something again. It sounded like somebody was quietly walking through the kitchen, farther away. I couldn't see that area of the house from where I was. I stayed where I was on the couch, wondering if I should call the police or what. For several minutes, though, I didn't hear anything more. So at that point, I was wondering if I had gone crazy or if a person was actually in my house. I hadn't heard anything in a while, so I decided to just go to my kitchen and look. When I walked over there, things were still quiet. Then, as I reached the end of the living room, I heard somebody walking again. Whoever was in my house quickly made their way to the basement door and then opened it. As I looked into the room, I just barely saw the door closing and then heard someone going down the stairs. This confirmed me that an intruder was in my house and they were now going in my basement. I sprinted out of the room. Then I ran to the other staircase and went up to where my bedroom was. I locked myself in the room and then called the police from my cell phone. They said that they would send someone over right away and that it would be about 10 minutes. I felt better, but I would not be able to feel completely safe until the police were there and the person was out of my house. As I was in my bedroom waiting, after maybe 2 or 3 minutes, I heard the sound of someone walking on the main level of the house. I didn't know if this was the person leaving or what, but the fact that I was hearing them at all worried me. I hoped that they would have just stayed in the basement and the cops could find them there. Then I heard the footsteps reach the bottom of the staircase. Whoever was there then began walking up. Now I was really worried. They slowly walked up the stairs, and then it was like they made a beeline for my bedroom door. They went right up to it, and then tried opening the door, which thankfully had a lock on it. When this happened, I desperately wanted the police to get there now, but they weren't there yet. The person walked away from the door, and then back downstairs. I felt slightly better, but they still didn't leave. I heard them just walking around all over the main floor for several minutes, until at last the police arrived. The cops entered the house, and within seconds I heard multiple voices. After a while, when it was safe, I went downstairs. I saw that there were several officers there. They had found a man inside my house who I did not know. I was told that he was likely trying to rob my place. Luckily, he hadn't done any damage or anything. How he got inside of the house, I do not know. I'm really grateful that I came out of that situation all right. The scariest part to me is that the guy went up to my bedroom when I was in it. I worked at a water treatment plant on the graveyard shift. The place was isolated, situated next to a highway that connected two cities about an hour apart. Nothing but some empty fields and trees were in between. It would just be me there during the night shift. My job and why I had to be there was to check the levels, adjust equipment every now and then, and basically just make sure that everything was working and it wasn't going to blow up. During my shift, I would be inside an 8-foot-tall barbed wire fence which was locked, but the access door to the rest of the facility were always open. One night at about 2:30 or 3 a.m., I was sitting in my control room area killing time on my Nintendo DS. The sound of the game was the only thing breaking the silence, and I was halfway zoning out when I heard a voice from behind me. The voice shouted out to get on the ground. I turned around and saw a guy standing there behind me holding a gun. He must have climbed the barbed wire fence to get to me, because I could see he was bleeding from several locations on his body. I must have been taking a while to comprehend what was happening, because the man yelled to get on the ground again. I didn't hesitate this time, and I dropped to my knees. He kept the gun pointed at me as he stepped closer. I remember that he kept apologizing to me, saying that he was sorry, but he had to do this. I thought that maybe he had been hired to kill me by someone, and what could I have possibly done to deserve this? He began asking for my truck keys, my wallet, and my phone. I didn't argue, and I handed everything over. Next, he tied me up. He used some duct tape that was near my desk, wrapping it around my wrists and my ankles. I still had no idea if I was going to die soon, or maybe I was being kidnapped and that's why he was tying me up. After a few minutes, the guy backed away. He apologized again, and then he turned and walked out of the room. I heard the sound of my truck starting up, and then the tires crunching the gravel as he drove away. For a moment, I just sat there, totally in shock, trying to calm myself down. The duct tape wrapped around my wrists and ankles wasn't the greatest, and I was able to free myself after a while. I used the emergency phone at the water treatment facility and called the police, and they said they would send someone right away. When the cops came, they asked me a bunch of questions, wrote down everything I could remember, and arranged for a way home for me. The next day, I found out the guy was arrested in the town over. He'd apparently escaped from an inmate custody transport a few days before, and had been on the run ever since. The police said he was desperate, probably running out of options, and that he had likely walked a long way to get to the water plant. That made sense, considering how far in the middle of nowhere the plant was. I even got all my stuff back besides the cash in my wallet, because he had been caught trying to pawn off my stuff in the next town over. I think about that night often, and have had to go to some therapy for it. The man was obviously desperate, and maybe he had thought about killing me, since it would likely have given him more time to escape, as the cops would have been called much later. There have been some other strange occurrences that happened while I was working the night shift job, but this one was easily the scariest thing that I ever experienced there. This happened when I was a kid, about 30 years ago, and I still think about it sometimes. I was around 12 or 13, and my friend Megan invited a few of us over for a sleepover. There were 4 of us. Megan's house wasn't anything special, just a normal suburban place, but it had this attic that we all thought was super cool. That's where we usually hung out when we were at her place. Usually at our sleepovers, we would just talk and hang out. It was nice, and sometimes we would smoke up there because we were kids just trying to be kids. One time, Megan said she found her dad's digital camera in the attic earlier that day. It was one of those chunky cameras with a tiny screen on the back. We thought it was funny how it looked, and Megan said we should mess around with it and take some pictures. We started taking stupid pictures of each other, pretending to pose like models or acting like we were in a scary movie. The flash on the camera was so bright, so everything looked washed out, which made it funnier. We even went down to the basement for a few pictures because we thought it would look creepy. And the basement was dusty and looked kind of gross, so we didn't stay there for long. After a while, we went back into the living room to chill. Megan started scrolling through the pictures on the screen, and at first we were just laughing at how ridiculous we all looked. Then Megan suddenly stopped scrolling and stared at the camera. She showed it to us and said something like, "Who's that?" In one of the pictures, there was a man in the background. He was just standing there near the living room doorway, looking straight at the camera. None of us remembered seeing anyone when we took that picture. Megan wasn't good with stuff like this, so she kept lying to herself and tried to say it was probably a shadow or something. But it didn't look like a shadow. It looked like a man. He was tall, wearing dark clothes, and his face was pale. His expression wasn't angry or anything. It was blank, like he was just watching us. We started freaking out. Megan kept scrolling through the pictures, and it got worse. In the next photo, he was closer. He was in the kitchen doorway, just barely visible. The one after that was worse. He was in the middle of the room, a few feet behind us. None of us had seen him while we were taking the pictures, and the idea that he was just there the whole time made me think of all the possibilities that could have happened. The last picture was the one that made me start crying. It was a picture of me and Emily messing around on the floor, pretending to fight or something. The man was right behind me. His hand was almost on my shoulder. I couldn't stop staring at it. It wasn't blurry or distorted or anything you could explain away. It was clear. His face, his clothes, everything. We all saw it. Megan grabbed a broom and demanded we check the house. Emily wanted to wake up Megan's parents, but Megan said they'd think we were being dumb. We turned on every light and went through the house together, checking every room, closet, and even under the beds. Everything was locked and nothing looked out of place, but none of that made me feel better. Eventually, we woke up Megan's parents. Megan's mom looked freaked out when we told her, but her dad tried to stay calm. He said it was probably just a reflection or something on the camera lens. Megan's dad checked the house and even went out into the backyard with a flashlight, but he didn't find anything. While this was happening, I remember the rest of us sat in the living room, too scared to say much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that man's face, the same face in the photos. The next morning, Megan's parents said they were going to call the police. They told us to stay put while they explained everything. But when Megan grabbed the camera to show the pictures to her parents again, they were gone. Every single one of them. The random pictures that were taken before that night were still on the camera, but all the ones we'd taken during the sleepover had disappeared. Everyone and their mom said it was just a glitch on the camera, as the tech back then wasn't that good, but I don't think he believed it. Megan's mom didn't say much after that, but she looked worried. None of us knew what to do. The man in those pictures was real. I know what I saw, and so did the others. After that night, none of us ever went back to Megan's house. We didn't really talk much about it either. I think we were all just trying to forget it ever happened. Megan acted like it didn't bother her, but I could tell it did. We all drifted apart after that, and I haven't spoken to her in years. Everyone didn't want to believe it happened, even the parents. But still to this day, I remember there was that man in those photos, and it was not a dream.